How to break free from herd mentality. The most obedient creature on earth is the one convinced it is free singing the song everyone else is singing, feeling taller in the lift of 1,000 voices, not noticing the leash braided into the chorus. Herd mentality does not feel like chains. It feels like warmth. It feels like safety, like certainty, like the rush of being on the right side of a moment. And yet, somewhere beneath the applause, a small question knocks. If a crowd can lend me courage, can it also borrow my judgment? Picture a long table in a sunlit room. Men in stiff collars once sat there, pencils ready. A simple task, match the length of a line. Easy, obvious. One by one, they offered answers that were obviously wrong. One man flinched. His eyes darted. He laughed to smooth the jagged edge of his doubt. Then he gave the wrong answer too. Not because he had lost his vision, but because the eye that mattered in that room was not the one looking outward. It was the eye of the group looking back at him. He felt it like weather. He adjusted his soul to avoid the chill. On another day, a square in a city filled the same way a lung fills. Banners rose like a second forest. The language was intoxicating clarity, without nuance, belonging without questions. People who had lived quietly next to one another discovered suddenly, and with grim satisfaction, that there were two kinds of neighbor, us and the problem. The crowd handled the rest. In another century, different costumes, the same choreography. A market floor turned into a theater, prices leaping, hands flashing, reasons sprinting to keep up. The herd is not a modern invention. It is an ancient weather pattern moving through human time, transforming hunters into marchers, thinkers into echoes, neighbors into instruments. If you have ever scrolled through a feed and felt your chest warm with anger at precisely the right time, if you have ever celebrated a leader you barely understood because everyone else understood him instantly, if you have ever laughed along at a joke that looked, later, like a wound you helped inflict, you have felt the herd moving you. You are not stupid. You are human. We are born into herds. Every infant knows that survival is a social contract signed in milk and touch and tone. Exclusion once meant death by exposure. The body remembers this even when the mind insists it is outdated. In offices and classrooms and online plazas, we obey ancient alarms with modern vocabulary. We call it brand alignment, consensus, momentum. The nervous system calls it don't get left behind. How to break free from that? The paradox begins here. Freedom does not mean leaving the group, climbing a hill, and declaring yourself independent. The theater of independence is often just another herd costume. Freedom begins with a more difficult descent, the one where you examine the exact flavors of your obedience. Whose face are you afraid of losing? Whose opinion closes your throat? What do you promise yourself in the heat of collective certainty that you quietly betray in the cool of solitude? Herd mentality is not a villain lurking outside. It is a temperature inside us that rises when we forget what it feels like to be responsible for our own eyes. It is easier than it sounds to forget. We live in an architecture designed for crowds. Screens that reward outrage with attention. Platforms that turn us into performers. Rituals that mark belonging with slogans and shibboleths. The room itself whispers. Don't ask a hard question. It will break the mood. Don't hesitate. You'll be crushed by the wave. Don't be the one person not clapping. There is a deeper terror in us than the fear of being wrong. It is the fear of being alone. The herd promises to exchange that terror for a simple fee. Your doubt. Your ability to pause. Your willingness to stand still when motion claims to be morality. Many pay gladly. They flourish for a while under borrowed authority, until the direction of the crowd swerves, and they discover that the same current that carried them can drown them without noticing. The crowd is not malicious. It is indifferent. History keeps receipts. In the streets of Amsterdam, tulips became passports to paradise, then anchors tied to ankles. In Salem, A community inhaled its anxieties until breath itself became evidence. In countless squares and stadiums, the choreography of a nation's mood danced proud, then shuddered when it looked back at what its steps had trampled. We prefer to think monsters caused those days freak storms of madness. It is harder to accept that ordinary people, our kind of people, stepped into a river of agreement and were carried further than they intended to go. Breaking free begins with a humiliating confession. I am suggestible. I am shaped by tone, tempo, rhythm. I am not a fortress of independent thought. I am a permeable thing, tuned by evolution to read the room first and reality second. If that is true, power does not come from pretending you are immune. It comes from learning to notice the music before your body starts moving. It comes from learning how to change the station inside yourself, even while the band outside is roared on by 10,000 throats. There are people who resist instinctively, but most of us require practice. We require story, image, and place to remind us of who we are outside the crowd's reflection. At the edge of a lake, a man once carved a small sentence into stone. Take no thought for what the crowd thinks. He did not mean, be rude. He meant, be able to hear your own sentence longer than the room can hold its breath. Without that, you will mistake panic for purpose, fashion for ethics, and popularity for truth. In your own life, the herd may not be flags and chants. It may be a team meeting where everyone agrees to a deadline that will break them, because saying no feels like treason. It may be a family rhythm that intensifies every holiday until someone's face goes gray. It may be the rush to pile on a stranger for a sentence clipped out of context, because the feeling of moral electricity tastes pure and public and so briefly critical to who you are. You feel your fingers move. You do not feel the 1,000 hands guiding yours. The descent we are making is not into contempt for groups. We need each other. We are not meant to be self-sufficient islands muttering into heroic winds. What collapses us is not togetherness. It is togetherness without conscience. It is a chorus that refuses a soloist, a march that refuses a walker who stops, a culture of speed that interprets the pause as betrayal. To break free is to practice a different rhythm inside the same crowd, to let your pulse fall out of sync long enough to ask a question that could cost you the warmth of the moment, and to keep your voice soft when the room needs you to scream. This is a tutorial written by time. The cost of conformity is not always obvious. By the time the bill arrives, the signatures on it are smudged by a dozen hands. We claim we were swept along. We were. But there is a way to learn to swim. It is less romantic than you hope, and more possible than you fear. It begins, always, with a single difficult breath in the middle of a chant that used to comfort you. A last image before we descend further. A murmuration of starlings, black silk in the sky, folding and unfolding in hypnotic shapes. No leader, no rehearsal. Beauty born of bewildering coordination. We admire it. We do not ask which starling wanted to dive and did not, which one was 2 inches from breaking a wing and decided not to. Herd mentality can be beautiful. That is part of its danger. It offers the aesthetic of certainty. To break free is not to become ugly. It is to become responsible for your direction. The sky will look different when you separate, at least at first. That is what frightens us. That is also what saves us. The herd feels like oxygen because it solves ancient problems. A child cries, and a ring of faces appears. A village gathers to build a roof. A community surrounds the grieving, the newly married, the sick. Together, we survive weather that would erase us alone. But the same circuitry that protects us carries a flaw. It confuses synchrony with truth. When our voices align, we begin to think our words are reality. When our bodies move together, we begin to feel our certainty is proof. Deep down, we crave a tempo to obey because it quiets what is messy inside. You can feel the pull of tempo in places that do not look like crowds. In the black mirror of your phone, 1,000 rooms unfold. Each one has its own key, its own proof that you belong if your anger arrives on time. The psychology is simple and old. Attention feels like love, agreement feels like safety, speed feels like competence. If you say the right words quickly enough, you become someone in a community that rewards your quickness. The price you pay is subtle. Your curiosity fades, your questions shrink to the size of slogans, and your conscience becomes an instrument that can play only one note at a time. The deeper motive hiding beneath herd behavior is not laziness. It is fear. Fear of exile, yes, but also fear of uncertainty. Ambiguity is a cold room. Certainty is a fire. You can warm your hands on the crowd's fire, even if the wood is wet with lies. We learn to love the heat more than the truth of the flame. We learn to despise those who open windows. This is why many of our worst decisions are made in daylight, with witnesses, with signatures. We do not hear our better sense over the roar of being part of something we confuse with goodness. Under pressure, the psyche uses tools that are efficient and dangerous. It projects what we cannot accept in ourselves, our fear, our envy, our aggression. We attach to a face beyond the circle and call it the enemy. We split. We simplify complexity into good and evil, safety and threat, so that our hands know which way to lift the sign. We imitate. We look sideways at the faces we trust and borrow their expressions like masks that feel, after an hour, like our own. None of this makes us villains. It makes us creatures who want clean lines in a world that resists them. There is a map for the inner weather. First you feel the warmth of inclusion. Then the narrative appears a simple story that explains the world with the grace of a blade. Next comes a rush of righteousness, so sweet it overrides the quiet voice asking for details. Finally arrives the demand. Act now or betray us. That is the moment that matters. The room is loud. The drum shadows your heartbeat. If you can notice the drum as a drum, not a prophecy, the spell weakens. This is not a technique. It is a practice. Call it inner descent. Call it loyalty to your own questions. Call it remembering what your face looks like when a crowd's reflection is taken away. We learn this in humiliating places. In an office, everyone nods at a plan that cannot work. The youngest person at the table knows it, but waits for a grown-up to say so. No one does. Later, the project fails, and a post-mortem discovers that everyone had doubts privately. They were waiting for a signal. They were waiting for permission. Only afterward do they realize that they were the signal they needed. That is one form of herd, plural silence disguised as collective wisdom. Another form lives at home. A family tells the same story every holiday about the relative who ruined everything. The story is a comfort. It explains the present by exiling difficulty into someone's past face. Nobody asks what the story protects. Nobody asks who pays the price of the version we all agree on, because it makes dinner easy. A child grows up fluent in this tempo. Later, they either break in strange ways or keep the rhythm by telling new stories about new villains. In both cases, the cost is the same. Exile of the inconvenient truth to keep the herd warm. Historically, crowds are made not only of bodies, but of borrowed language. Banana plantations, boardrooms, politburos, parliaments, each has a dialect that permits certain truths and forbids others. How to break free? You cannot argue your way out of a dialect while speaking it exclusively. You must go somewhere that speaks differently. That could be a literal place, the archives, the woods, the workshop, the hospice. It could be an old book that embarrasses your assumptions. A conversation with someone who has nothing to gain by agreeing with you. A practice that slows your breath until speed loses its authority. Freedom loves slowness. Herds love speed. Something else is required. You must become intimate with shame. Shame is the currency of the herd. It keeps us in step like a whistle we pretend not to hear. The first time you break rhythm, You will feel it in your skin, a heat, a shrinking, a need to explain everything at once. If you cannot bear that heat, you will rush back into the circle and call it reason. If you can bear it, something new appears, a small clearing in which your mouth can say no without an army behind it. That clearing is the beginning of a different kind of belonging, one that cannot be taken away because it is not borrowed. Resisting the herd is not glorious. It is awkward. It makes you late to news cycles, slow to condemn, cautious in praise. It may cost you some invitations. It will give you others. People who are secretly tired of performing will find you. They may not say so out loud. They will breathe different air in your presence. This is not mysticism. It is the physics of permission. A person who can pause confers pause on the room. A person who can ask a real question teaches muscle memory to those around them. Herd mentality thrives on borrowed certainty. It starves where curiosity lives. There is a story, too, about rescue. When crowds go wrong, a single person's breath can change an outcome. A woman on a bus refuses to move. A scientist insists that the numbers are being massaged and declines to sign his name. A student raises a hand to ask how we are defining the words that are marching past us. None of them leave humanity behind. They bury their roots deeper into it. They choose a different herd that is less visible and more durable. A lineage of people who traded applause for responsibility. You can train for this without a cape. Begin by noticing the first 10 seconds of your reactions. There is a tiny window in which your body chooses whether to join or to witness. Give yourself a ritual to find that window. Touch the table. Breathe in for a count you can keep even when the room is spinning. Look down at your hands. Ask yourself the one question that good mobs never tolerate. What would make me change my mind? You do not say it out loud. You honor it privately. That single, unseen act clears you a body length of space in the stampede. Do not misunderstand. Groups are not the problem. Unconscious groups are. A meeting that permits a single vote of no can save a company, a family, a city. A culture that celebrates the person who complicates the narrative before we etch it in stone will bury fewer children beneath its slogans. That requires courage from leaders and tenderness from followers. It requires a shared knowledge that dissent is not disloyalty when it is offered to protect what is living. Uprooting herd mentality demands memory, not the kind printed on plaques, but the kind that remembers how often crowds have been wrong while feeling perfectly right. Memory melts the glamour off momentum. It slows the intoxication. When your age says, "Everyone knows," memory replies, "Everyone once knew the opposite." The whisper is not cynical. It is loving. It loves the future enough to discipline the present with the past. It loves the human animal enough to respect that our greatest strength moving together needs a counterweight to keep it from swinging the whole species into ditches we later pretend were storms. At the center of the herd, something truthful hides. We want to belong to something worthy. The trickery of false belonging is that it offers worthiness as a feeling detached from obligation. Real belonging has dues. The courage to tell your own people when they have crossed a line, the patience to learn from the stranger, the willingness to accept the cost of your no. There is no shortcut. There is, however, a path worn by people who walked it before you and did not die of loneliness. They found better companions in the clearing than in the crush. Here's the turn that matters. Breaking free from herd mentality is not a rejection of belonging. It is a vow to belong at a different depth. You do not leave the human circle. You change your contract with it. You say, "I will not surrender my judgment to maintain a feeling of safety. I will not trade curiosity for choreography. I will not confuse noise with meaning, speed with urgency, or consensus with conscience." Then you live in such a way that your life becomes a shelter for others who are ready to make the same vow. This vow returns you to yourself, but not to isolation. It connects you to a lineage of people who held a different kind of line. They were rarely the loudest in their moment. They were the ones whose silence was not submission, whose speech was expensive, whose refusals were made without spectacle. They gathered in kitchens more often than in stadiums. They wrote letters instead of slogans. They planted trees the crowd had no time for. They are the reason your life includes freedoms that someone once considered inconvenient, dangerous, disloyal. What changes inside you when you break free? First, time changes. The crowd's clock runs fast. It demands verdicts that cannot bear appeal. When you step out of its tempo, time slows. You begin to feel the difference between the heat of now and the warmth of later. You discover the patience to check the source before sharing the outrage. You allow your grief to complicate your judgment instead of purifying it into rage on schedule. You become less susceptible to manipulation because you are less afraid of missing the parade. Second, your mouth changes. It learns the discipline of I don't know. In herds, ignorance is a crime, so we fake knowledge to keep our seat. Outside the herd's courtroom, not knowing is a doorway. You can walk through it with someone who disagrees without needing to win on the first mile. Your questions stop being weapons and start being bridges. This is not softness. It is structural strength. Bridges carry weight because they are built to bend. Third, your eyes change. You begin to see the person behind the position, the fear breathing behind the fury. Herd logic collapses people into roles. Freedom returns faces. Once you see the faces, cruelty becomes difficult to perform on schedule. The mob wants you to forget that the scapegoat has a mother. Your freedom remembers. It does not excuse harm. It refuses to dehumanize, even while it draws bright boundaries. This is the kind of seeing that keeps a civilization from snapping in two. Fourth, your spine changes. You become anchored enough to accept the cost of your no. The herd tries to terrify you with exile. Exile from what? The party? The project? The digital village? You discover that exile is often a door into a room where your integrity is waiting with tea. It is lonely for a while. Then people you did not know or were watching arrive quietly. They bring news. They thought they were the only ones. This is how new herds start, not herds, really, but communities with rituals that honor the person as much as the chorus. Their songs are slower. Their metaphors are roots rather than waves. Finally, you begin to notice how your own mind tries to form a herd of one. Inside you, there are crowds' voices that chant, moods that march, impulses that stampede. Breaking free in public begins with breaking free in private. You learn to convene your inner parliament instead of letting a single emotion stage a coup. You become a host to your anger instead of its hostage. You teach it when to speak and when to feed the fire. You befriend your fear without letting it drive. You place your pride under oath. This is not the conquest of your nature. It is governance. It is government by consent within one life. This kind of sovereignty has outward consequences. In a meeting, you become the person who can say, "We might be wrong," without ruining the hour. In a friendship, you become the person safe enough to hear the complicated version. In a public square, you become the citizen who can stand still, a sole figure not shouting, a signal that there is another way to be together. The world will not give you a medal for this. Sometimes it will punish you. But there will be nights when you sleep without the buzzing in your bones that follows borrowed righteousness. The quiet will feel like permission from the oldest parts of you. History suggests a strange mercy. Crowds can change when enough people inside them remember how to be people. A stadium that would have swallowed one dissenting voice can be turned by 1,000 quietly anchored ones. Animated not by contempt, but by a love that refuses to lie. This is not romantic. It is arithmetic. The number of people required to hold a line of integrity is always fewer than the number required to lose it. Decay is easy. Repair is possible. Stability grows in the shadow of a few who insist they will not outsource their conscience. even to the most spectacular chorus. You may ask, where do I begin? Not with a manifesto, with a practice. Choose a place in your life where the herd's expectations and your truth have been at war. Sit with the discomfort without anesthetic. Do nothing dramatic. Wait until the first pressure to perform subsides. Then move the smallest distance in the direction of what you know. Send one difficult email that clarifies a boundary instead of performing compliance. Ask one clarifying question in a room allergic to them. Spend an evening with someone outside your algorithm. Read a voice from another century when your own time is screaming at you. Treat your attention like a sacrament. The herd recruits it cheaply. You spend it slowly. In time, you will develop a personal constitution. Not a document, a felt code. Its articles will be short. You will know the difference between a disagreement worth losing a friendship over and one that belongs to weather. You will know when to shut your mouth to protect the living core and when to open it because silence would stain it. You will know how to apologize without entering the courtroom of infinite self-abasement. You will know how to forgive without inviting the injurer back to the same leverage. These are the arts of free people. They are old. We act surprised to need them because the herd promised we could outsource them to leaders, brands, or our favorite outrage. Breaking free does not make you superior. Beware that temptation, because it is just another costume the herd will sell you. Breaking free makes you available for the work, for the hard conversations, for the parts of the future that will not survive on slogans. It makes you sensitive to the moment when your side becomes a mirror image of the side you oppose, and it gives you the stamina to withdraw your hand without surrendering your hope. That is the rarest thing in a polarized age. Hope without intoxication. Stand with me, then, in a square at dusk. The crowd is gathering. Some carry torches of righteousness. Others wield screens that glow with the day's essential enemies. Your pocket hums. Your name trends in no place. No one calls you to the microphone. You put your hand on your own chest. You feel the drum there, older than any chant. It is not asking you to leave. It is asking you to remember. You belong to a people that is not a mob. You belong to a tradition that insists the person remains a person inside the largest storm. The sky darkens. The city hums. Somewhere, a child threads her fingers through a fence and watches us to see what is possible. Now, the smallest act of rebellion. You take one step to the side. Not far. Just enough that you are no longer directly behind the person in front of you. The line ripples. It is not defiance for spectacle. It is a private alignment made visible. Perhaps no one notices. Perhaps one person does, and suddenly remembers the dimensions of their own body. Movements begin like this quietly, awkwardly, with a breath taken against the rhythm of the room. This is how a species invites its future to be less brittle than its past. You will fail at this. You will be swept, sometimes joyfully, sometimes stupidly, into waves you swore you would watch from shore. That is not a reason to quit. It is a reason to keep your sense of humor handy and your rituals intact. Return to the practices that slow you. Return to the friends who tell you when your face has become a mask. Return to the long voices that outlast afternoons. Freedom is not a state you arrive at. It is a maintenance schedule. It is the work of tending the wild garden of your judgments so that you can feed more than your own vanity. One last paradox. When you break free, you become more useful to the herd, not as a follower, but as a conscience. Not as a scold, but as a reminder of what people can be together without losing their names. The future needs crowds of rescuers, of builders, of neighbors who can read grief without texting for permission. It also needs individuals who can stand in the square and remember the child with her fingers in the fence. She is watching to learn the shape of adulthood. May she see a shape that includes a spine and a heart, in that order, held together by a mind that knows how to pause. If this opened your eyes, subscribe to Boring History, because the truth is never boring.